you so much for coming to our extremely last-minute event with Audrey. It's really wonderful to see all of you here. I think it's really great for us with CIP to see so many different aspects of communities that we've been a part of and worked with and care about for so long coming together in one space to talk with Audrey and to really discuss what we hope is kind of the future of collective intelligence we all want to build together. And so we're really, really delighted to see all of you.
By the way, there's seating kind of there and here-ish. Yeah, if people want to sit down.
And over there, next to the sound.
Yeah. Are a little low on.
Obviously, this is a very informal event, so we were thinking of structuring this as, we were talking to Audrey about what we most want to see out of this, and I think a lot of that is getting to know everyone here and kind of what's top of mind for everyone. So wanted to start out with first kind of going around and everyone mentioning what's top of mind for you, and just ideally 2 sentences, just your name and what's top of mind for you. There are more people here than we thought there would be, which is great. And so just keeping it pretty short, and then we have a couple of questions that we think can help set the stage and context for what we're doing here and what we want to build together. And then we'll open it up to questions from everyone else, if that sounds good. Just for some context, there's a documentary being made on Audrey, and so we were thinking about filming just the Fireside Chat kind of portion of this, not the rest of the event, but really want to make sure everyone's comfortable with that. So please, let us know now if you are uncomfortable with being filmed in this portion, and then also if that feels strange for you, let us know after and we can cut it from the footage 100%. So just definitely want to make sure that that option is open, and feel free to talk to us privately if it feels weird kind of coming forward in the group.
Yeah, I sent an email to everyone with my phone number, so you can just text me if you're uncomfortable with filming. Also, there's a Slido that you're very welcome to use to submit questions that I also put in the email. But the code for that, if you didn't get the email, is 3066447. Let me know if that is anyone actually. Yeah. 3066447 for questions.
After we go through the questions on the Slido, we're happy to take questions as they emerge, but it's nice to have a place to capture them, both in, to have them in the future and also as we're doing the chat if you want to put them down there. So with that, I think it would be great to start going around. Audrey, if you want to start off.
Sure.
Your name and what's top of mind.
Yeah, I'm Audrey Talent, Taiwan's digital minister. My ministry is a new one set up last August. Includes 3 things. One is participation with all the Department for Democracy and Network and so on. Another is safety. I'm also head of national cybersecurity. Another is progress. Also head of national digital transformation, including AI policy. And putting all 3 together in a ministry is quite impossible. It's called a trilemma, which is why I work with these people to solve it.
Right. What's top of mind?
Yeah. So solving the trilemma.
Yeah, so I guess to give some brief context on why we're here, I'm going to take longer than 2 sentences because it's my event. I'm kidding. I realized I forgot to do this. To give some context on why we're here, this is a very last-minute trip, and it came from, obviously CIP was set up to start surfacing democratic input into transformative technology to solve the trilemma, right? And very recently, evidently, we are all thinking about transformative AI capabilities and how is it that we can direct those in a democratic way and really raise up public legitimacy in order to set the policy for what to do with transformative AI. And Audrey was coming to speak at the Summit for Democracy, and so we wanted to use that as an opportunity to kick off what we're calling alignment assemblies, which will be a global process of running a bunch of different kinds of deliberative processes to surface people's values into AI systems. And I know we're collaborating with a bunch of different folks here on different aspects of that, and it's part of the reason we're really excited to have you all here together. We came to San Francisco to start setting the seeds of that and have with a bunch of folks in this room, and are really excited to take that forward. So that's something that is top of mind for me that we've been talking about a lot, obviously, and really looking for partners and collaborators in figuring out how to do that. We've already kicked it off with the initial poll. We'll be sending it out to folks who have been strong voices in this space to start trying to cut through a bunch of the polarization and start building sort of a more collective model of what we could do going forward. And please talk to us if that's something you're interested in working with us on. And I'm Divya.
Oh man, I'm Saffron. I'm co-founding CIPU with Divya. What is top of mind for me is, how can we get the alignment assemblies to happen? How do we get a bunch of people on board and like build a coalition around this? So, honestly, would love like any old support in that. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Cool.
And do we want to film this portion or?
If you don't want to be filmed, just say something. So, and the camera will be off.
Sebastian Smith, the co-founder of Impact Academy, and top of mind is so I have a lot of curiosity about this space. I still have a lot of things to learn, and I'm curious to understand how it relates to bigger picture things such as existential risk and also kind of existential hope.
Cameron Jaffe, top of mind is how you describe the trilemma. Just curious to learn from everyone here.
Hi everyone, my name is Dayar. I'm the president of the AI Objectives Institute. What is top of mind is how can we get AI systems to be aligned with human values? How can we build frameworks that can help elicit these information? And what will be the institutions of the future that will be running on this information?
Hi everyone, my name is Thibaut. I run a company called Ava that helps people who are deaf and hard of hearing to have 24/7 captions. So beyond capturing this event, I'm interested in how do you collectively and globally, internationally, get people to work together. So not just reserved to the ecosystem of AI risk people, but also include the democratic groups.
I'm Nick. I'm a product designer at Substack. Top of mind for me is whether I will have a job in like 6 to 8 months. Basic security. That's it.
Tristan Harris from Center for Humane Technology, interested in governing AI risks.
Colleen McKenzie, I'm also at AI Objectives. Top of mind for me is how to find syntheses and common ground between all the different perspectives around how to integrate new technology into society.
Zarina. I read this thing recently which talked about how humans have only ever dealt with other forms of intelligence by domesticating them or treating them as wild beasts. And I'm interested in how we can go beyond human values. I'm not very impressed by human values. And whether this can be the opportunity where we do better than domestic or wilderness mentality.
Hi, I'm Philip Rosedale. I started the virtual world called Second Life, and I'm starting a new lab with a few other people right now here in San Francisco trying to work on using technology for good, for human beings.
Hi, Ramin Sarabi. I'm with Democracy Next, and we are focused on building institutions for the next democratic paradigm and quite interested in global federated deliberations from the public space in these questions.
Matt Pruitt from Radical Exchange Foundation, and I am concerned with how the people of the world are going to have a say in what the future looks like.
Great. Yep. Hi, everyone. My name is Humphrey. I'm local participator democracy nerd, also a product manager at Recidiviz. My primary interest and what's top of mind is really thinking about accounting for like local values and nuances, ensuring that the people in a particular physical space here have agency over those decisions.
Hi everyone, I'm Lemma. I'm a policy researcher at OpenAI, and I'm interested in the question of what meaningful representation looks like for understanding impacts of AI systems.
Hey, I'm August. I've been focusing in the AI art space since 2020, so I think I've been thinking a lot since then on just copyrights or with AI, and then ethics also, and how all of those come to play here.
Hey guys, Nick Pinkston, do stuff in manufacturing and in housing policy. I guess my question is more on the practicalities of actually making this a political reality in sort of the U.S. State and local context. Like, how does the thing perform in an actual way of making better decisions, but also, like, does that even happen in politics, like in a practical reality? Thank you.
Hey everybody, my name is Rishi. I'm a software engineer at a company called Oasis Labs. I guess the thing that I think about the most is like data governance and ownership, both individual and collective, and how that might factor into the ways that we align our AI systems.
Hey everyone, I'm Marcus Stefanos. I'm a psychology and culture researcher, and I'm curious how the things that are coming on the horizon here enable new forms of institutions.
Hi everyone. Over there.
Cool. My name's Jasmine. I am a product manager at Substack. I also run a publication about technology called Reboot. The thing that is top of mind for me is even if we have great deliberation about values, how does that contend with the arms race and profit-seeking dynamics where the AI actually gets built?
Hi, I'm Emily. I cover elections at the Washington Post. I'm generally just interested in healthy information ecosystems.
Hello, I'm Selena. I'm building a system for knowledge and information management. And what's top of mind for me is incorporating AI into it in a way that isn't bad, which is hard because there's so many ways for it to be bad. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I'm a research fellow at Transformations of the Human. Something that's kind of top of mind for me is, I think it was Edouard Glissant's like right to opacity and just what it means to have relations with like that we don't totally understand. And yeah, also just curious about like what we might learn about like the history of just humans trying to get along with one another. Yeah, and how that might branch into the non-human. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Kelsey. What I always think about is how to produce freedom within enclosure. And recently, what I've been thinking about a lot are plants. And I was like really astounded walking in here because we're surrounded by so much like lush vegetation. I'm not sure actually if all of it is real, but
It's real.
It's real? Okay. I'm very much enjoying it. I've been thinking a lot about plants and what they can teach us about the ways in which intelligence is actually a function of connectedness and how existence is like so fractal and intermingled and what that means for like new possibilities, new modes of relation that we can have with one another. I've also been thinking about Edouard Glissant, who he says this stunning thing about how relation is fundamentally archipelagic. He says that there are, we only meet each other for moments at a time as isotopes of what we are. Actually, that's Timothy Morton's words. But in like brief encounters on islands that emerge out of like the ocean of maelstrom of being and are submerged once again rapidly.
Hi everyone, my name is David Blumen with Plurality Institute, and I'm really interested in superintelligence, how we take small intelligences and put them together into larger intelligences, both artificial and humankind, and how we align our values, our epistemology, our action together to all act in concert and be greater than the sum of our parts.
Real minefield. This way.
Hi everyone, I'm Rose Blumen and I'm also with Plurality Institute and I help run a homeless service organization in San Francisco. And what I've been thinking about is, you know, for a long time it's felt like we've been in a period of like stagnation where we want to change and it's, you know, been very challenging. And now we're entering this transformative period. And I think it's very exciting and very scary. And, you know, I've just been thinking about how can we harness this and how can we help this, like, create the better society that so many of us have been dreaming about for so long. And so, yeah, really excited to be part of this conversation.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I work at a legal tech startup. In terms of AI, I think the thing that I'm most interested in is how AI can level a playing field, especially for like in class action lawsuits and for people who don't have as many resources to into their cases, how we can leverage these tools to make things more fair.
I'm Will Marshall. I live here with a few colleagues, and I build satellites doing Earth imaging, trying to do to move capitalism to take care of nature. That's my prime work, but also as a hobby, thinking about how we might do to move AI and the alignment problem to help us with the nature problem if we can put those two challenges together somehow so that we get rid of both of them.
Hi, I'm Kazumi. I'm a random law student. I have a naive interest in AI and geopolitics.
We're just in the process of doing, like, name what's top of mind for you. You came at the exact right time if you want to just share quickly.
Also, there's a documentary being filmed about Audrey, so they're filming some parts of this, but please say if you know.
I'm Ivan. I work at Anthropic on societal impacts. Top of mind for me today is legibility and reducing illegible harms from technology.
We were just spent several hours working on this. I'm Alex. I have a nonprofit focused on strategy of coordination problems and thinking about the way technology by default produces legible harms and illegible downsides.
Illegible benefits.
Yeah.
Sure. Hi, I'm Colin. I've been working on Bolus for the past 10 years. It's an open source technology which has been used in Taiwan and elsewhere, and president of the Computational Democracy Project, which maintains Bolus as a technology and advances it.
Did we miss anyone? Oh. Melanie.
Hi everyone, I'm Melanie. I work at Goodly Labs. We're a collective intelligence R&D lab, and our flagship product identifies over 50 types of misinformation in the news using a collective intelligence model similar to Wikipedia that leverages volunteers, and the final product will lead to an AI that can do the identification itself.
I'm curious if you have any reactions to what's top of mind. Well, when we asked Audrey what she thought of SF, she said, "It's better than it sounds in Astral Codex 10.
Right, this is about the platforming of things, right? If you just read Twitter threads and, I don't know, Time articles or columns, you will think that there's only the fast forward button and the pause button and the spot button people. But then when I'm actually here, it seems like the moderate voices are actually in the vast majority, and even the people who are quite polarized on the risk part or the capability part, all agree actually of the short-term things we must do, because these are obvious, and if we don't do those things, we lose coordination powers, which means the future is even more uncertain, so we might as well do some alignment first. So this is what makes me so optimistic, because I was flying in expecting a lot of polarization, and it seems that you have all just depolarized yourself, so which is pretty good.
Questions? Yeah. Okay, one question I have is, why did you become Taiwan's digital minister?
Okay, so I was Taiwan's digital minister without portfolio in 2016, but last August, as I mentioned, I became Taiwan's digital minister with a ministry, and both times there are different reasons. In 2016, that was because we spent 2 years since 2014, the Sunflower Movement, to use a different set of legitimacy building devices with 500,000 people on the street, many more online. We use facilitation in a dynamic, nonviolent form, but also live streaming and automated summaries and things like that to make sure that that was the Occupy, the first Occupy that did not go nowhere. But right, but thank you. But actually converged by the day, right? So every day we put up this reflection of what we did actually achieve, a little bit rough consensus people can live with the previous day, and then more and more and more. And so with all those live streaming, keeping people honest, like not killing people or making other missing, the 20 or so NGOs that started Occupy finally descended, converged on a set of very coherent demands with all the supporting rationale, and the head of legislation simply saying, yes, that's what we're going to do. And so what used to take years in other jurisdictions, like whether to allow so-called private sector of the PRC regime into the 4G telecommunication core, right, which is a very difficult debate in other jurisdictions when it comes to 5G. We just did that in 3 weeks, and it was a overwhelming, of course, there's no private sector, right, and at that point. And so after that, the Korea Public Service became very interested in not getting those controversial topics so polarized so that people will occupy the parliament again, however non-violently we are. And so they want to make a lot of investment, especially around emerging technologies that could totally disrupt the society, like Uber or Airbnb at the time, which again in other jurisdictions takes months or years to figure out a lot of flip-flopping. So we work with Scotland, and one of the 4 crises we went together, right? The first of the 4, right? To get very quick consensus over just 3 weeks, 4 weeks of what everyone, taxi driver, Uber driver, everyone is feeling okay about what specific parameters Uber can just dial, right? Search pricing okay, especially in rural areas, but not undercutting existing meters, insurance, and things like that. And so instead of debating very polarized topics like is the sharing economy or gig economy, we actually descended again on a set of very coherent demands, what we call blending coherent volition, thanks to the less wrong community in Taiwan. And so that solved the Uber problem, later on Airbnb, many other things. We did privacy preserving contact tracing together, many other things. So now in 2016, I was tapped into the parliament as a minister at large in charge of social innovation, open government, and youth engagement, which is really the same thing, and just bootstrapping this kind of social entrepreneurship around Taiwan to give us different set of incentives to what we call social innovation organizations, which is motivated by this not for-profit but with-profit incentive in Taiwan. And so that went on pretty good, and that grassroots support helped us to counter the pandemic without any lockdown, any day of lockdowns, counter the infodemic without any takedowns, along with many other things. But then Ukraine happened. And so last year, I totally, without any preparation, was told that I'm going to head this new unit that will take care also about cybersecurity, including AI security and many other things, and to prepare Taiwan to field this adversary that is 10 times of our compute power, and with cyber attacks and everything. So I remember last August, right before the ministry formed, there was a day right after Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. There was a military drill, missiles flying over our sky, and also the denial of service attacks that has never been seen before in Taiwan, 23 times more than the previous peak in a single day. That disrupted many government websites, propaganda, disinformation, you name it. And then I said publicly to the press at the time that, hey, okay, I'm going to be the minister. We set up the ministry's website on the same hour as the drill started. And because it uses Anycast and IPFS and all those new technologies, we've not ever been done by even 1 second. So I said that to the press. We got a lot of free testing, and then still it's up, right? So then it's got into the mind of many Taiwanese people that this what we call digital resilience for all is reliant on the really collective awareness of what's actually going on in Taiwan, and everybody can contribute to help because we're using those what we call public code, right, open source technologies that are shared among jurisdictions, like with the Estonian Xcode and so on. So there's really two parts of my work. One is strictly about participation and participation in policy making, like future of institution stuff, and the second is on like really hard cybersecurity, counter-propaganda stuff. Yeah.
I'm curious, I think this came up in things that lots of folks shared when they were doing introductions. In terms of, in particular, thinking about AI, there's this worry, I think Jasmine put it well, like how do we marry this participatory component that is important, that we care about, democratic input, public legitimacy, with real worries about the risk, the incentive structure that things are coming into, profit-making arms race. And I think, you know, in particular, we've discussed the CIP trilemma a lot and structuring something that can allow participation, progress, and safety. And I'm curious if you could speak to ways that you think we can have both, basically, and in fact, you know, use the participatory process, if anything, to support on the slowing the arms race, changing the incentive structure kinds of questions as well.
Yeah, and I think really this is not about finding this perfect fusion of horizons of all actors, right? It's not that. It is more like getting all around the world. There are people like me who are reading those articles and columns and petitions and things like that, and to reflect a more accurate set of common values of all the practitioners here to the people of the world, so that we don't panic, right? Because if we do panic, we lose all our coordination ability. And so the initial kind of short-term goal is really just to get people into a mindset where we think about the bridging, aligning values that we all share anyway, right? And also see some very small things. It could be just, I don't know, system messages or world model updates or just a different set of paraphrasing filters or whatever, right? That is a tangible result of such conversations. And that will, I guess, inform both of the boundaries about like how much AI, narrow or wide, is allowed to interact with the society, that discussion, and also about the capability discussion, like, so this is a systemic way for the democratic input into language model itself, so that we feel comfortable that the language model can also be used to an extent to this kind of processes. So it become a virtuous cycle instead of this mutual, mistrust thing.
Maybe, like, how are you thinking about, since we're now on the topic of AI as usual, how do you sort of, like, think about preparing Taiwan for the kind of structural societal changes that are imminent?
Yeah, so before joining the cabinet in 2016, I was in the basic education committee, right, to determine the curriculum of the entire basic education system. So I'm a middle school dropout. I dropped out on my 7th, 8th grade to be an entrepreneur. And so I always thought that any part in the education system that relied on the fact at the time that internet was not popular should be gone anyway. All right, so rote memorization and all that. Right. So we started this movement in Taiwan about alternative education, where people either homeschooled or in institutions get to choose their own curriculum, and of course, the internet helped a lot. Right. So even though at the time we don't have this compressed internet that can talk to you, it serves as more or less the same crisis impetus thing that prompted a lot of people to rethink about what we want out of education system. So after a while, we have this coherent relation again, which is the three values, right? Like the only things we want people to learn in that post-internet internet environment is autonomy, right? A sense of curiosity, interaction, a sense of like the ability to build social muscles, and then common good, right? The ability to align on common values. But anything beyond autonomy, interaction, and common good is and can be delegated to like non-human systems. So that was kind of our conclusion at the Basic Education Committee. So we're very intentional. We replaced everywhere in our Ministry of Education communication material, anywhere we mention literacy, like media literacy, data literacy, whatever, we just did a global SSG to replace it to competence. Because literacy is when you are passive, when you consume. Competence is when you create, and only by co-creation can we actually align anything. We cannot align anything just by being literate about things. And so that became the main ideas of our curriculum. I'm happy to report that our basic education, all the teachers and so on, are now running on this upgraded substrate, so they don't feel threatened at all. By ChatGPT and so on, at least not this generation. Right? Right, so we've done some societal upgrade back in, I think it was 2019. Yeah.
I mean, we have tons of questions, obviously, but there are lots of brilliant people here. So do you want to check the Slido and if folks have added things? Otherwise, have folks added things?
I do not think folks have added things.
All right, so why don't we just do questions now?
I know, it's higher bandwidth.
One question I have is when I think about this initiative of creating a global process of some kind where we grapple with the questions before us, one of my most significant worries, I think, is cultural difference. I think that the culture of this place is very particular and very hard to read, very hard to understand. It comes off strange, and it is strange. And I think it's, I would love your thoughts basically on how to bridge that. How do we create a process that does not get stuck in this cultural particularism or get hung up on it?
Yeah. So I'm traveling this time for the first time to the U.S. on a diplomatic passport, which is very unusual. And the name on the passport, the name of the country, I always translate that 中华民国 as transcultural Republic of Citizens. And so transculturalism is part of, I would argue it defines the contemporary identity of my polity, which has 20 national languages, including sign language, and 16 of which indigenous. And all of them want actually some sort of self-determination and sovereignty, especially around language models, because currently ChatGPT, and not just ChatGPT, not meant to singling it out, the pile, right, the common crawl, doesn't do justice to any of those 20 national languages. It doesn't even do the traditional Mandarin very well, let alone the other 19, right? So all of them, the language community wanted some sort of, like the Icelandic example of just commoning first the corpus, but also the norm around the interactions to such models, but also through some sort of federated or of sign tuning or whatever, be able to then take that process and share the process to nearby communities as well. So there's a lot of very intentional work going on in the Indigenous Nations Committee and also with Mozilla Common Voice on Taiwanese Dai and other communities to try to make sense of how do we both in a kind of totally respectful way have the language communities own that language, even with language models, but then as a transcultural polity to agree broadly on the processes of doing so, so that we share those kind of common boundaries in a very, Ostrom kind of way of recursive commons. Yeah.
I'm curious how you think about this broader arms race that AI can turn into, especially as it involves China. We're having a lot of discussions here about whether we should slow down development, focus more on safety or interpretability. And one of the common refrains is, well, if we slow down and China doesn't, we're going to end up in a worse situation. Or do you think about building like a global alliance that involves the Chinese researchers, or do you have some other strategy that you're thinking about?
Yeah, so interestingly, according to that Polis conversation, which is totally not representative, but it does show interesting bridging tendencies. So these two are related, right? So most people, regardless of whether they think that we're doomed soon or whether that saying those that think saying we're doomed soon actually dooms us soon, right? So we shouldn't say that, right? So regardless of which camp you're on, they seem to all agree that like this is not at a point where this is the most urgent thing on the planet. That we should just drop everything else that we're doing and align it like right now or like yesterday. So the sense of urgency is not at a point where coordinated action is not possible and we have to resort to some sort of, I don't know, martial law or something, right? So this is the first thing. And then also that was also a statement on the police report that says, you know, the PRC would probably just, you know, go to singularity or something like that if we pause for 6 months or so. And again, like people, these two are highly correlated. Like people don't generally feel that way, and they especially don't feel that way if they don't feel that way on the first question, right? So I think there is still time for coordination, and especially if there is a way to find this kind of alternative substance to build the language model's relationship with society, that it sounds about just right, right? So I talked to my mom, which was a journalist back in the 70s, 80s, and she covered this whole, like, there was this compound called Freon that disrupts the ozone layer of the planet, so everybody would get cancer and die or mutate and not die. But anyway, and the research at the time was super laser focused on finding these alternate coolant, right, for refrigeration systems, so that if we all switch to that in a coordinated action worldwide, then we save the ozone layer, which is now healed after 20 or so years. But that is because there's this very clear like solution here. It's just like flattening the curve, right? Once you grasp that idea, then it's obvious that everybody should do that. And once we have that idea, then the polities of the world can just say, you know, if you keep using the old coolant, then you're you know, crime against the environment and humanity and so on, and becomes a much easier, geopolitically speaking, way to strategize things. So this urgent need for clarity, I think, is why like everybody in the police groups that we have seen all agree like this clarity, like flatten the curve or whatever memes that we were going to produce, that is the first thing, and it also makes solving the problem of the great power thing easier.
Yeah, for context, we are currently running a polis discussion with basically the tool that Colin and his team has made and has been used in Taiwan to gather people's views on generative AI. And you can visualize the opinion clusters of, you know, what people have agreed and disagreed with, and you can see what statements get broad consensus, which is most of them, and which ones are the most divisive statements, which are like far and few between. And most of the very divisive statements are actually about how we should talk about the issue. Like, should we be like hyping up AI? Should we be like hyping up fears about AI? That's like a very divisive thing. But there's a lot of consensus about.
Yeah, the great thing about polis is that you get to see there are only two things that divide people, and everybody actually agree with everybody else on everything else, right? So this has this very therapeutic effect because our calories were, you know, wasted actually just on these two things. I mean, not that these two things are not important, but actually there are many low-hanging fruits that we could be focusing on. Yeah.
Yeah, and the poll is at cip.org/S4D if you want to look at it. And we're also planning to send it out to a bunch of the folks who like signed the letter, people who are really angry about the letter, et cetera, just kind of expand the mapping process so that when we start running these assemblies, we have a really good sense of all of the kinds of opinion clusters that are out there. So yeah, excited about doing that and talk to us if you're interested in kind of helping us analyze the data, especially afterwards. I know we were thinking about routing it through, for example, talk to the city and other kinds of things.
I've been retweeting the summaries and OGT, the Twitter account, and if you click to join the conversation, there's this underlined link called report, which is very easy to miss, actually, that takes you to the live updated version of the rough consensus. Yeah.
So I think of alignment as first a human problem rather than first a technical problem. And this manifests as, failure to coordinate. I also think of existential risk as a risk of failure to coordinate at the face of any risk that exists. So given that, I'd love to hear stories from you on cases where you have seen misalignments in society or in the workflows in Taiwan, either from the collective or from the institutions, and how you have worked through to realign these systems or the collective intent of groups.
Yeah, as I mentioned, this is the fourth time that I've worked with Colin to overcome crisis. Right, this has a very Asimov feel to it. But anyway, so so the first was, as I mentioned, the UberX thing, the V-Taiwan processes. But we've seen actually during the pandemic that the infodemic really is the real crisis, just exactly as you said, right? Because if the infodemic reduced the societal capacity to coordinate, then we don't get through the pandemic very well. So it's almost as if whether the jurisdiction has gone through the pandemic well is a function of its ability to have this viral vaccines of the mind that shields the population against the infodemic, right? So it's very mental. So for example, in Taiwan, we used to have also this vax, anti-vax thing, and that's not helped by the shortage of actually available vaccines. And but we were able to tap into collective intelligence principles to overcome that. So much so that I think, one of the highest vaccination rate also, but also just people don't feel panic when the vaccines are slow to arrive. And we did that by having this public scoreboard, really, of people pre-registering their willingness to get vaccinated with AstraZeneca, Moderna, BNT, Pfizer, Medigen, and later on Novavax, but at the beginning just 4. So we turned this anti-vax zero-sum thing into this friendly competition of my vaccine better than your vaccine. And so I got like 5 shots of 4 different brands just to make a point. So, I feel just fine, right?
5 brands of microchips?
Right. I know, super intelligence, a cluster, right? Right, but it's really important because at the beginning, the elderly people, after seeing the reports from Europe about AstraZeneca's initial side effects, they really don't want to get vaccinated, and their panic and anxiety touches upon the middle-aged people and the younger people as well, and anti-vax conspiracies, because we have this system in Taiwan where anyone, even end-to-end encryption channels like Line, which is like WhatsApp, can long tap a message and report that as spam, right, or as scam, and so it doesn't compromise end-to-end encryption, but it does let us build a very accurate real-time map of what disinformation is going viral at any given point, so that we can focus our counter-narratives, comedic efforts also to counter that, called humor over rumor, but I won't go into details. Anyway, so while we see that the anti-vax sentiments are trending because of these elderly reluctance, we ask everyone to, as I mentioned, pre-register their willingness, so that we say very publicly every 2 p.m. That so many young people, 2 million or something, already accepted AstraZeneca, and this age group, they don't like AstraZeneca, they're waiting for Moderna, so we're lowering this age group to now 30 years old, 20 years old. So this has 2 effects, right? First is that everybody can see that younger people are receiving AstraZeneca and they're not dying, and the second is that, okay, so they are waiting for Moderna or Pfizer, BNT, and their verbal attack become against Medigen or against AstraZeneca or vice versa, and not against vaccination in general, right? So it turned a zero-sum or negative something into a positive something, like my sport team or whatever against yours. And so that massively changed the information landscape. So, which is why I always think that even a partial, initial, but quick reflection of what people actually feel as a whole, holistically, to people, is actually the antidote to this individualized learn helplessness thing that is the fertile ground for disinformation and conspiracy theory to thrive. So I hope that's an illustrative example. Yeah.
I had a question. Just so we're obviously early in our thinking about how to align AI, but if you were to speculate on where you think this will land in terms of what's the equivalent to flattening the curve or the the ozone layer equivalent, like whichever you pick your analogy, what's the equivalent simple understanding that we're going to get to, and is it sort of more precautionary in nature or more reactionary in nature? Because when I think a lot of the things people are grappling with here in Silicon Valley right now is centered around, if they do bring existential threats, then of course one would be pretty smart to be precautionary rather than reactionary, unlike many other technologies which don't have such effects. And secondly, just I wanted to come back to Zarina's point about how we've treated, and actually you mentioned Asimov a second ago about even our preliminary attitudes towards AI are very centered in essentially dominating it, when one might, more thoroughly think about a moral system that it would have moral value to. And it's very similar to how we've been treating all the rest of animals, which is not particularly very well. And how do we graduate in our thinking about that so we don't flop into those same sort of more reactionary thoughts on just putting it as subsidiary to human interests when it may go beyond that at some point. And the mere fact that we're starting that way worries the heck out of me. So how do you think we do that move in human psychology, if you like, in our approach?
There were successful co-domestication attempts, right? Like with wolf dogs, right? Our gazing algorithm is co-domesticated with dogs, and so I mean that actually happened, right? Or so I'm told. So co-domestication is how I think about these things. So we joke about a Shogo's friendly restaurant or something like that, but maybe not the best analogy. But it's not just, as you said, about taming the dragon or things like that, even as a community, but rather also looking at how the humanity has been structuring ourselves on the misaligned incentives, like, for example, individual-to-individual competition over, say, IQ or other standardized tests never made sense anyway after personal computing, right? And everybody can see it doesn't make sense, but yet it goes on, right? So this co-domestication is also a chance for us to look at those, frankly speaking, way outdated societal structures, and maybe determine that maybe it's time to just let go of these things. And if we do let go of these things, including rote memorization and standardized tests and so on, then we don't need to be so harsh, right, in drawing a societal boundary around very, very narrow AI anymore. Right, it can actually take more creative roles just because we've also co-domesticated the society a little bit more, right? So I'm not advocating for implants or microchips in my bluffing or things like that, but just to let go of a little bit of those societal rituals. Right? So that's the thing, and the speculation of like how success looks like, essentially, yeah. So I always, because I start with my conversation with my mom about ozone, right? So I always think of the ability to trust people swiftly over a distance, right? Swift trust is a thing on the internet to coordinate with your neighbors, not neighbors in time zones, but also places, but rather neighbors in shared values and co-production. That was the core thing that made internet a safe space for us who want to be part of the commons, and that is a fabric of trust. And so if interactive deepfakes that can very perfectly execute social engineering or cons, scams, robocalls, and so on, render it such that we can, like before the internet, only see other people who we can touch as human and not very trusting them anyway, then that will massively reduce the fabric of trust to a point where global coordination to solve environmental problems become essentially impossible, right? So I redid my Summit for Democracy talk to specifically talk about interactive deepfakes as the one kind of emerging threat to the fabric of trust for global coordination. So if one need to come up with this very short-term, very specific scenario, that would be the scenario. And so the success will look like that, oh, we've overcome that, actually. So we've got resilience so that even if there is like almost no cost of it running on my MacBook, this large language models is already be tuned by uninstructed very large models that can just deepfake me at any given point. Still, the society feels just fine, and we continue to coordinate despite that, and that will count as initial success.
When you were giving your background story, you casually mentioned like the full-scale invasion of Ukraine kind of changing the directory of where you were headed. I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more about how that like landed in Taiwan and why that was such a milestone.
Yeah, I mean, the Ukrainian experience, first, just from a geopolitical point of view, it was clear to everyone in Taiwan that if Ukraine just lost the war quickly, we will be the next, and within a year there will be no Taiwan anymore, and we better start uploading everything to blockchains or something, right? This is serious cabinet level conversation. So anyway, right, but of course they were very resilient and showed that collective intelligence actually counts for something. That transparency and anticipating this information and working in the open, as I mentioned, vaccines of the mind through even humor or comedy, right, on the presidential level, actually is great, and that's how democracy become more resilient. So the whole playbook really changed, and now we, for example, focus on getting all the 3 public cloud providers, setting up local zones in Taiwan, setting up zero trust systems so that the adversary have to break all 3 different vendors in order to really get anything, otherwise just a honeypot, working with at least 3 different satellite providers, and so on. And so just double down on resilience and on societal resilience, which is journalism, and getting everybody to civic journalism training, and to make sure that because we know that the result of the fact check or the community note, no matter how good it is, actually doesn't cure people from polarization. But the process of going through fact checking depolarizes people and making them immune. So it's the act of fact-checking, the act of blending volitions, not the blended volition or the fact-check products that inoculates people. So we're thinking and actually already doing a lot of those structured conversations that let people exercise their digital competence and therefore become immune or immune-ish when we know that the adversary will come that coordinates cyber attacks with disinformation campaigns. Yes.
How are people thinking about the ability to create propaganda much more easily in the age of LLMs in the government? Like, are you trying to preempt that? What are you worried? What's going on there?
Is it still propaganda when it is a addictive chatbot that you talk to all the time instead of other people, right? Does it still count as propaganda? Because this, to me, is just precision persuasion, right? It's I guess still propaganda to a degree, but I think at the end of the day, we don't see authoritarian interference to our elections be pro something or against something, which was the traditional definition of propaganda has a position. No, it was always about just amplify the extremes amplify the polarization. It's not about any particular narrative, but rather about getting people into this mood of not trusting other people except this bot anymore, right? So I think that is the threat landscape. It's not propaganda per se, but rather how do we systematically depolarize so that when the adversary wants to amplify any extremes, it's actually just providing a sample of viral vaccine or something like that, right? So I'm thinking along those terms. But of course, it makes propaganda very easy to produce. But just, I think, if you're truly a nefarious actor, then you will not stop there. Yeah.
Similarly to how we thought about the ozone layer, what is maybe a current model that could be updated of like 10 to 15 years from now, a healthy cohabitation with AI? Do you have like a certain sense of things that probably will be true and other things that you still are working on? Can you kind of get in on that?
I mean, on the highest level, right, of assistive intelligence, co-domestication, harmless, honest, helpful, right? These are the things that everybody agrees on. On the other hand, what's less clear is the pathway, like how exactly to get there, right? It's just like the 116 hours of sustainable development goals. Of course, these are great goals, but they interact so much that it really truly takes a coordinated, not fully coordinated, just coordinating action so that people become aware first of the externalities, the harm, if they don't act. And then for the stakeholders that suffer the harm, to empower people closest to the pain, to surface that harm in a very quick fashion and feedback to the decision processes so that it can be addressed timely, because otherwise you lose those people to polarization, right? So that's this kind of meta picture that I have in my mind. I'm very influenced by how our Central Epidemic Command Center behaved during the pandemic. They used the lowest of low tech, a toll-free phone number where anyone can call, just 1922, and just talk for minutes or hours if you want, to a human intelligence that's trained in disaster relief and empathy and things like that, and social work that can truly listen to your pain and maybe find something that you can do. But also, if this is systematic problem, for example, in 2020, early on, there was a young boy who called 1922 saying, okay, I'm a young boy, you're rationing a mask, which is great, but all I got was pink, which is not great. I don't want to wear pink to school. I don't want to go to school if all I have is pink mask. Please do something about it. Ration blue mask to me, and so on. And obviously, this is not something that can be solved, right? Because we don't have control over the color of the PPE printing. But what happened was the very next day, next 2 p.m., the minister, Commander Chen Shizhong, and all the medical officers wore pink. And he said, the minister said, Pink Panther was my childhood hero, or something like that, right? Something very funny, in a very funny way delivered. And that's because we have a team of participation officers who are already trained in the art of collective intelligence, embedded in every ministry. And so they were able just to come up with those ideas. And then all the participation officers in all the 32 ministries, all our social media, became pink, and then all the leading brands and everything, right? So the boy become, I guess, the most hip boy in his class, for only he has the color that the heroes wear, and the hero's hero, the Pink Panther, wear. So anyway, the point I'm making is that it's in the agility of this response process of surfacing the harm and redress of the harm. It's not in any particular action that we take, but in the kind of resilience in our relationship muscles that we're prepared to take whenever there is harm. Yeah.
And I guess like one following point here that I'm curious if there's consensus is the level of employability, I think, of people. So if we project ourselves 10 to 15 years from now, is the topic of are we going to see the same unemployment rates, or are they going to be fundamentally different? And is that topic even agreed upon? Like, will there be some people on state fund, welfare state, UBI type things?
Exactly. And
Do you have a model?
and the point is to treat those as harm, right? Because if you just treat as collateral damage, natural consequence, soil and green, or whatever, right? So it's not going to work if you just treat it as accidental, and so it happens. Sorry about that, right? So instead, like any time that there may be harm or there is already an inkling of harm, then we need to surface that harm and make it a social object around which that people can just talk about a way to not just mitigate, but co-domesticate, so that the harm become an opportunity to, I don't know, wear masks to express ourselves. Because it's pink masks and then rainbow masks, and just people who didn't want to wear masks because it was interpreted as a sign of silencing our own speech or whatever, after those pink, rainbow, whatever mask incident, they become a point of pride, right? I choose my mask, paint on it or whatever to express myself. And then the base population number of that original Wuhan variant just way down. So which is why we went by that year without any lockdowns. So it's turning that into something that is actually pro-social.
Follow-up to that. I love this humor over rumor approach. And that seems like a substantial institutional shift in how I imagine Taiwanese government was operating. Could you say more about how that came to be? What does that look like? Do you have a staff like The Daily Show? You do? You got like humorists?
I have a podcast too. And I have a set of meme pictures of me just posting all the memes. It's on Flickr in the Creative Commons Zero. Anyone can just take my likeness and create very funny memes.
Genius. And do you have any humor approaches to the AI conversation right now?
Yeah, so we're thinking about that. Maybe we'll just ask language models to come up with those jokes. Yeah, but I think, but that come actually after, right? The actual thing, like flattening the curve, getting everybody to wear a mask and keep physical distance and so on. And then the comedians get to work and produce a very funny spokesdog, a Shiba Inu, saying that when you're indoor, keep 3 Shibas away, outdoor, keep 2 Shibas away, and put a very cute hand on the mouth and said, wear a mask to protect your own mouth against your very dirty hand, which compare that, connect that to hand washing, which was the other thing that we need to do. So really we need to distill the science into these things, like the ozone and the compounds, and then apply humor to it. Because if we start with the humor without actual payload, well, then it becomes very empty and even cynical.
One thing that was really surprising to me when I first heard about your work is just how quickly Taiwan was able to upgrade its democracy, its government. And I'm curious what your sense of like what created that. Is it just a different culture or straight capacity? We can't build a toilet here for less than $50 million. And it seems like Taiwan was able to just completely change how their core systems worked in a matter of a decade.
Well, that's what existential risk do to a society, right? There is a clear urgency for clarity, right? During the Sunflower Movement, is that if we don't figure out how to interface with so-called PRC, private sector components in all our economy, then we just die, right? So that's, or captured or enslaved, but anyway, so that was the urgency, and so which is why we upgraded this entire collective intelligence system in a very short span of like 3 weeks or so, because the entire society was focusing on this one thing. And I guess Uber was more tame at that point, but we were riding right on that common peak experience and think that we'll just apply police to everything. But turns out it's only good for emerging technologies that really want a lot of urgent clarity and not anything else. But anyway, so we figure out how to upgrade our democracy, because every time there's this urgent need for clarity, the other side of the equation is so bad that we cannot even fathom not coordinating. And it's the same actually for our SARS experience in 2003 as well, because we were hit by the SARS the most among all jurisdictions, and we're like never again, and which is why the CUCC was designed, and all those upgrades, including IC cards in our universal health cards and so on, were justified because we just don't want the SARS experience again. So I think this is the first time, because I was also at DC in the CSIS, the think tank, to talk about the importance of mask and rationing mask and visualizing the rationing of mask in the dashboard in March 2020. Met with lukewarm response. Right? But I think this time around, there is common urgency in all jurisdictions when it comes to AI risk, which is what makes me so optimistic, because then we don't have to suffer this time lag between Taiwan upgrading and everybody else upgrading. Yeah.
Yeah, to build off that, when I was working in DC, a good or a helpful tool one of my bosses said to me is, if you're trying to write a document that is going to be presented to Congress or the Senate, write it as if you're speaking to something that has the collective intelligence of like a golden retriever. And so what are the tools or what are the ways you found to speak to specifically like American policymakers that obviously have no concept of half the things you're talking about? Have you found ways that you can communicate more effectively?
Well, I would speak in terms just of depolarization. It seems that, and I was, as part of this trip, invited to the governor's roundtable here to talk about inclusive and engaged democracy, especially career public servants, and I suspect also the assistants to legislators. Their capacity to really do anything is hampered by this polarization thing, which leaves very little room for credible neutrality. Because, in all those crisis response I mentioned, it relies on institutions, like in the V-Taiwan Uber sense, it's the National Academy in Nangang that is above all the ministries. So people believe it's credibly neutral, right? When it comes to flattening the curve or surfacing Dr. Li Wenliang's message that SARS has appeared again in the Huanan seafood market, it is the PTT Reddit-like bulletin board system that's been running for 25 years by National Taiwan University and is provably nonpartisan, and so on. So every time we anchor this collective intelligence process on something that is credibly neutral. But in the US, I don't know. National Public Radio, maybe. So I don't know, right? So I would just speak in terms of depolarization, the need for credibly neutral institutions, maybe NIST or something, I don't know, to hold a space for a conversation for all of their politics and ideas to reach across the aisle so that we can coordinate. And I think that is the level of conversations and the topics. I would not set any particular topic, but whatever topic they want to talk, I think most agree that without such a setup, most of the energy is wasted.
I will say we were trying to brainstorm credibly neutral organizations in the US on the way over, and it was extremely difficult. So if anyone has any ideas, do let us know.
Oh, like OMB?
Sorry?
Like OMB, like organizations like that are meant to play a neutral role?
Yeah.
Yes.
Meant to play a neutral role, but also genuinely seen as neutral. Like Audrey was mentioning, universities, libraries, and all of these things, as we know, have become very polarized in the US, even if they were meant to play a neutral role. So anyway, something that we've been thinking about.
In terms of the AI trifecta, you've been here, you've been meeting a lot of different people and organizations. Where are some gaps in the conversation that you have seen, or gaps in the work that is being done that you think would help us, most reach our goals?
Yeah, I think it boils down to the legitimacy, right, of whatever processes that we're doing, right? If you look at a harm, redress, justice, mitigation, reconciliation perspective, then it's obvious, right? Any stakeholder groups that can prove their stakes by saying very clearly how they are harmed by language models or generative AI is eligible to have a voice And it really doesn't matter who starts first because it would be a kind of rolling stakeholder survey thing that people get a ticket to enter just by showing how they're suffering because of this technology. That was the strategy we used during the Uber conversations, right? It could be unionized taxi, it could be going rural places or whatever, but as long as they're harmed, they get an invitation to the table, and if they propose on Polis bridging narrative that can also speak intersectionally to other groups, then they're invited to the actual table to talk with Uber representatives and so on. So, but we don't yet have that clear, what is the equivalent of taxi unions in the language model world, right? So there's no clear sources of legitimacy if we start from a harm redress justice perspective. But there are other perspectives, of course, sortation juries or whatever. So this is an open question.
I guess we're already starting to see communities that are feeling scared, like writers, and do you feel like you've seen their perspectives being represented in the conversations?
Yeah, I think all the labs, regulators, governor, and so on want to listen, to hear these voices. It was just that it was generally thought that the process is so costly and so slow and so not fully representative after all, that running this to some point would be like, finally getting the consensus on wearing masks 2 years after the initial virus, right? So which it would be totally pointless by that time, right? So because we'll have reached so-called herd immunity, right? So the timeliness, the capacity for a collective intelligence process, however imperfect, to evolve in tandem with the capability and the risk of this technology. I think this is the most important thing. So we need to work on with the same interval, really, the same iteration cycle, and just not perfect, but improve the process as we go on. We cannot just wait to say, okay, we'll just have this perfect World Assembly, although we're going to talk to the World Assembly people, and then start action, because by that time, people have already this learned helplessness sense of their harm are not going to be redressed by any process. Yeah.
If I could switch to how do we make such a rapid move as you have, but on the economy taking into account nature, right? Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, we're stuck in the world that's mainly driven by GDP, not taking into value all of the natural services we've been using, which has obviously tripped us up left, right, and centre and led us to where we're presently at, roughly. Do you have any thoughts on how we change there? Do you have a plan? Taiwan would do that or implement that there and potentially showcase to the world how it could do it globally.
Yeah, so your work, which is fully making apparent the externalities on a timely fashion, again in the same interval as the actions through satellite imaging, and making sure that the jurisdiction fully account for those externality, both for action like social and economic return on investment and alternate way of funding and grants and so on, but also, that's the carrot and the stick part, right, of, just negligence now become much more easier to prove. And once you can prove negligence, this entire, harm redress justice process enters play, right? So I'm very interested. That was my entire work before Ukraine happened. So I'm very interested in that in Taiwan. And that's how I encountered, for example, quadratic voting and quadratic funding and things like that. In Taiwan for 5 years now, we run the presidential hackathon, where more than 200 teams each year propose the small experiment they can do on a county or township level, and they always have to align with at least one of the 169 SDG goals, targets, and then we vote through quadratic voting to prioritize the top 20 to receive incubation, and the top 5 receive this presidential award, and by that time their team has to contain at least one public servant, one private sector person, and one social sector, civil society person. And the trophy is a microprojector that, when turned on, projects the president giving them the trophy. So very meta, and it's a non-fungible token of commitment from the president to scale their local level experiment to the national level, because it's been proven that it provides a regenerative value SDG-wise to that locality, and so they will receive that system will receive all the personnel, budgetary, and law regulatory support from the president to make that happen, right? So, and this is entirely regulatory level. Like, usually we don't pass any new laws, just interpret existing ones so that it functions in a regenerative way. And the social innovators are really happy because it changes your incentive structure. They're not going to get any money anyway, right? They're just going to get a promise that their new model is going to be national scale, right? So we're prototyping things like that. And now we're experimenting with taking, because every year we only bless 5 teams because of our bandwidth, but there are like 100 other teams that deserve a chance. So we're also now working with quadratic funding, coupled with crowdfunding, to award them at least some bootstrapping budget to do that in a way that's even more parallelizable than presidential hackathon. But I can go on details, but yes, that's the general shape. Yeah.
I know we've been here for quite a while, longer than we intended, but it's really wonderful. But, thanks to Colin, I believe we may have dinner. Is that true?
Dinner for 20, which is the guest list.
All right, everyone eat half a dinner.
For maybe another 20.
But yeah, I wanted to end with, at some point in the last few days, I remember asking Audrey if she ever feels overwhelmed by the scale of what needs to happen in the world to kind of build the future we all see, and she said no. And so I'd love to kind of have you speak on that really briefly, and then we can close and each have
okay, right. Yeah, because existential risk really is my thing, right? I was born with this VSD, this heart condition, and diagnosed when I was 40 days old. And when I was 4, one of my earliest memories was me and my parents or my grandma taking me to this doctor, and they look at my readouts and say that, this child is too young to get a surgery. There's a 50-50 chance that they will live to such a day that they can receive a surgery to fix the heart problem. And that was quite formative. And so, I don't remember anything before that anyway. So after I was 4, until I actually got the surgery when I was 12, for 8 years, I go to sleep not knowing whether I'll wake up. There's just like a coin flip, right, every night. And I never overcame that, right? So I coped with that by simply publish everything before I go to sleep, which is why you see that in order to film me, or the filmmaker and Terry has to agree to upload to Creative Commons 0 everything they film me, because I want to publish before perish. And then, right, as a minister, the public interviews and so on, you can find on Say It on YouTube and things like that. And that is how I overcame my coping mechanism, right? By making, instead of just obsessively, compulsively publish, redirecting this energy so that I honestly can say that it doesn't matter if I don't wake up, because all of you already have a mental model of me anyway. It is still in very easy to understand terms. And so after I'm 12, I'm theoretically okay to contemplate a longer life, but core personalities don't change. And so I'm still at a place where, so when I was young, if my heart beats to above a certain BPM, I just pass out, suffer a mini stroke, and find myself in infirmary again, right? It's like the Hades, the game. And so basically, so with some music, I'm sure. So anyway, so, and so I learned very early on that in the face of this existential risk, my survival instinct was just to process in the interval of a day. So whatever I can process in a day and I write up by the end of that day, I feel at peace. I don't mind if I don't wake up. So that's my coping mechanism and how I sublimated it so that it become kind of the national digital strategy. But anyway, so that's that. Yeah.
Thank you all so much for being with us. Thank you to Audrey.
All right, so thank you for all your contribution to the Commons. You can download that under CC0, I think tomorrow, somewhere. Okay, so that's that, and that's it for the on the record part.